We started this journey together, chasing the unknown, seeking what we could not see. But now, we're lost.
Greetings, and today I will be reviewing a neat little short sci-fi horror game by the name of Routine, set on our very own moon. Let's get right into it, beginning with the first and most important aspect of any game, and that is the price. Routine will cost you about €24.99 or your regional equivalent, so that's about $25. At that price point, the length of the campaign and its genre is very important to mention. Routine is a very classic story-driven exploration and puzzle horror game with a smidge of combat. At the making of this video, I have about 7 hours clocked in on my first save game, which is about the time that one playthrough will take you. When looking at the gameplay and mechanics and the story later on, I hope you can make up your own mind if $25 is adequate for the experience this game offers or if it is not. I personally would always argue to be careful with your money, and if this review is not going to fully convince you, do not buy this at a full price. If atmospheric, mostly hide-and-seek based horror games are not really your style, then it is understandable why that price point for a rather short experience might be a bit too much for you. In that case, a discount would be where I could give you a more enthusiastic recommendation, maybe at $20 or a little bit less maybe. It all depends on if you think a 7-hour sci-fi horror game based on puzzles, light exploration and some nice little spooks is worth $25 to you. I like the game, but my personal opinion should not sway you to be responsible with your money. Only buy this if what you see is piquing your interest. Now let's get on to the performance. This is an Unreal Engine game. It was also about a decade in development. But thankfully, I can report that the performance in this game is very stable. You get your generic transmission loading stutters, but the well-known Unreal Engine stuttering due to shader compilation and so on and so forth was not something I experienced in this game. This is also possibly related to the fact that this game uses fairly small level spaces and is set in a rather cramped moon base, so there aren't any large set pieces or structures that this game needs to load. As always, the most impressive part due to the use of the Unreal Engine is the lighting in this game, which was used to much success here to create a very moody, sometimes surreal atmosphere. The game is very green at certain times. That might be a stylistic choice, nothing that I found irritating, but the prominent presence of that color was something that I took note of. Other than that, the game runs well. Again, there isn't any large spaces the game would need to load, so the setting of the game plays well with the engine in this specific case, letting the developers hone in on a bunch of detailed and well-designed retro science fiction rooms and some very well-done atmospheric set pieces. Let's now move on to the menus and options in the game. The menu in Routine is fairly sparse. I obviously wouldn't expect anything insane from a short little horror game, an indie game to be precise, but some choices in the menu layout are a little bit strange. First off, the game does have an FOV slider, but that's it. It's literally a slider that does not show you what your FOV might be sitting at if you increase or decrease the slider. So you either know you lowered your FOV or that you increased it by an unknown amount, but you never see what the FOV is actually sitting at, which was quite a weird decision. The only other complaint is that there is not a separate audio slider, and I understand why. This game is a very audio focused, and the audio is also one of the strong points of this game, so maybe the developers did not want the different settings and options to potentially destroy the soundscape in this game by lowering certain aspects of the sounds in the game. And the rest of the menus are some very straightforward basic options you will find in any other game that you have ever seen. I would suggest getting rid of motion blur and film grain though. I have no idea why games still insist on adding that to the experience. At least we don't have the cinematic bars anymore, more of the top and bottom of the screen. Remember when that was a thing in games? Anyway, let's move on to the most important part here. Since it's a video game, we will now talk about the gameplay and mechanics. As I already outlined, the game is mostly hide and seek based. It's a classic defenseless protagonist horror game with some exploration and lots of puzzles to solve. Well, you're not completely defenseless. You're not completely defenseless at all, actually, but you don't wield a conventional weapon. Let's just say it like this. The game revolves around the Cosmonaut Assistance tool, henceforth and in-game known as the CAT, which is what I will use when I talk about this unit. It's called the CAT, short CAT. The CAT is a multitude of functions that get explained in a very charming in-game tutorial, as in the tutorial is in the actual game world. It's a presentation that you can watch. Most of the things you do in-game will involve the usage of the CAT, whose modules you will update and upgrade throughout this playthrough. Depending on the active module, there are multiple ways you can interact with your environment or the entities in this game. The very first module has a basic camera and can be used to aim and overload terminals. You aim with the camera sensor, then remotely overload terminals with an electric pulse, which can open doors, get around malfunctions or restart equipment, and so on and so forth. This module is also used as a basic weapon against the robotic threats in the game. That isn't really a spoiler since the robots were primarily featured in the promotional footage. All CAT functions require battery power, and your batteries have 3 visible bars. Therefore, you get 3 uses of the electric shock, for example. Other functions use different amounts of battery life, so you might not directly see the drain on your battery display. All functions and buttons are on the actual CAT device, so nothing happens in like a heads-up display or in a menu. You actually press the buttons on your CAT device to activate or deactivate different modules and functions. It also acts as your mobile interface for this game's save stations. There are usually giant screens with a wireless access point where you can connect your CAT to and save the game. And yes, this is how you save progress. And this is also what creates a lot of tension in this game, because getting murked at a certain point in time loses you your progress depending on when you last saved. This game also has like a very soft autosave function though, so don't be too afraid if you haven't saved in some time. It's not like these stations are rare though, they are readily available throughout the entire moon station. These access points also serve as a hub for all media, tasks and keycodes you might have collected, and you can all review these if you have forgotten about a keycode. So either you note the keycode down somewhere, or you take a photo of your screen, or you just revisit an access point and then you look at your collected keycodes if you've forgotten one. There's also one little issue with the gameplay aspect of this, and that is the availability of the batteries in the station. There are batteries everywhere, which does diminish some of the survival horror aspect of the game somewhat. I made a deliberate choice not to abuse the tool anymore once I saw how long the electric shock actually stuns the robots in this game. Yes, you cannot put down any of the robots or any of the threats in this game permanently, but 3 charges and a battery in each room means you can use the tool pretty offensively and pretty liberally too. And that takes away some of the spooks in this game, or at least a little bit. Especially later on in the game, I made sure not to overuse one of the latter modules and its offensive power, as I felt it severely detracted from the horror aspect. I understand why there are so many batteries around though, because not the offensive functions of your CAT, but also all of the utility functions take away battery life. And that is why there are batteries pretty much scattered around in every room, because you need the battery to solve the puzzles. But you also need the same battery life power to stun threats in the game. It's kind of an issue with how the game was balanced. Maybe there should have been 2 separate types of power management systems in the game, but that's one of the issues I found, that overuse of the defensive options that this tool has can detract from the horror aspect that this game has. The second module you unlock for the CAT lets you scan fingerprints, and it also acts as a much more potent light source in the game. It's essentially a heat scanner that lets you scan surfaces for hidden messages. And a lot of these are secret messages and little secrets in general. Most of the wall paintings in the game can be made visible using this cat module, and you then can take a look at what have people scribbled onto the wall. It doesn't necessarily have a gameplay aspect, these wall paintings. It's just a little bit of storytelling that was put into the game, which is hidden from you unless you use that specific module. And then the last module gives you the grainiest camera out of all of them and lets you photograph door interfaces to open them, if you have the required security clearance. And this interface is also part of one very special mechanic that I cannot spoil, as I don't want to ruin the payoff. In general, most areas of the game are centered around the function of one or more of your cat modules. First, you get your first module, and then there is an area with lots and lots of door overloading. Then you get your fingerprint sensor, and then there is an area where you scan a bunch of fingerprints and photographs and walls to get into touchpad secure terminals. And then later on, when you get the last module, the cat becomes a door opener for you. It's not like older mechanics are completely dropped in favor of new mechanics, which is good. Even late into the game, you will still overload certain panels and photograph fingerprints, but usually one mechanic takes precedent over another mechanic depending on in which area you are in currently. There is one puzzle at the midpoint of the game that involves most of the cat modules working in tandem with each other, but that is one of the only points where you almost need every single module at once. Then there is also the basic movement in the game, which has some interesting quirks. You can look left and lean left and right, but you cannot move while leaning because it requires the press of the spacebar. You can aim your cat device during a left or right lean though, which is good, but you cannot move. Then you can also look over certain obstacles or reach up a little bit, so to say. That reaching up mechanic, however, was never really used as far as I could tell. Stretching up to look over something or stretching up to maybe find something on a shelf, that never really came in handy. Maybe there were batteries high up on a shelf somewhere that I missed, but I haven't used this mechanic too much. Then there's also crouch and a full-on prone mechanic. Yes, you can both crouch down and then go fully prone. And the proning is used in a few areas to reach under a door or to get something that has fallen under a locker or a cupboard, for example. Most importantly, while you can use the cat as a light source somewhat when crouching, depending on which module is enabled. Any module that is passively expanding light is also going to light up the space where you crouch in, but you cannot draw or aim your cat device during a crouch. That might have been done to deliberately balance the game in order for you to actually be forced to leave cover and hiding spots to aim your tool at some aggressor or to check for stuff. If you could just aim the tool while crouching, you could possibly, stun an enemy from a hiding spot or while crouched under some sort of obstacle that the enemies can't reach. And as you might have already expected, the game revolves around following clues to puzzle solutions, meanwhile dodging the enemies or monsters in this game and then proceeding as told by the flow of the story. And the best thing to highlight about this game's mechanics is a severe lack of annoying yellow paint strips and generic menu tips and helps and some muttering protagonist spouting out puzzle solutions for no reason. That is completely absent. The game has the trust in you and your intelligence and your ability, but also challenges you to actually use your head to solve issues, riddles, and the roadblocks in front of you. I was pleasantly surprised when the game let me get stuck and I had to actually find a way to solve the issue or the riddle at hand without constantly pointing me towards a solution once the game decided I was too stupid to do it on my own. Yes, the game has a little to no hand-holding and the tutorials are all very well integrated into the actual game world. There is a huge amount of immersion going on here, and I applaud the game for treating me like an actual adult with my problem-solving skills. And that is how most of the game works mechanically and gameplay-wise. Now let's get into the story. First off, I want to try to keep it as non-spoilery as possible. If you want to see the full game and you don't want to play it for some reason, I will try and get my own playthrough uploaded here in the next few days as soon as possible. But in short, you wake up on a resort station on the moon moon, having woken from a nightmare or maybe a vision. Now you are stuck in an isolation chamber due to an ongoing sickness on the ship. You're basically in containment. Until you are cleared, you're basically stuck here. But we get out using the door terminal without basically checking if we're actually contagious or not. We are an IT specialist sent here to this moon resort station to repair and assess the security system that has been acting odd since the moonquake incident. It turns out this security system utilized the robots on the station and has taken out basically everyone here besides you. One of the reasons there are no corpses is due to these robots also bagging up all of their killed victims. Now, unfortunately, this is not elaborated on further. We never truly find out where these bodies went, nor do we find some sort of horrendous mass grave. Why this all happened is pretty obvious. You know, the station's automated security system initiated a shutdown due to a quarantine procedure and is trying to keep whatever is going around the station from escaping it. The reason for the infection is seemingly one man who went out to do a perimeter check after the moonquake occurred, and instead he found a humanoid body with growths protruding from its body in one of the crevices on the moon. That encounter alone seems to have infected him in some way, both physically but also psychologically. Symptoms of pain are accompanied with visions and hallucinations. And naturally, we also start exhibiting these symptoms. So we are infected as well. So we followed its primary goal to shut down the core of the station's security system. And once we do so, we reach the half point of the game where the story gets way more esoteric and where I want to stop telling the story, since a lot of the cool stuff would be spoiled if I go on. The one thing I want to mention about the story is how, even if I wanted to, I could not really fully spoil or explain the conclusion. Yeah, it's one of those thinking man's games. It's a very 2001 Space Odyssey in a way, only with some extra spooky horror stuff tacked on. There are certain people who also call this game an Alien Isolation ripoff, and while I don't agree that it's a full ripoff, being compared to Alien Isolation is in my eyes more of a compliment than an insult. Unfortunately, the esoteric aspect of the story leads to the progression in-game feeling very erratic, with large time skips, sudden location changes, and so on and so forth. That could confuse a lot of players, and unless you pay close attention to the logs and the console entries around you, you might wonder where and when and how you arrived at a certain point in time. Let's just say there are two major locations. The resort, which is a much newer location, and then the other location later on in the game, which is a much older construction. As to what your character is driven by, well, it feels like you are quite literally following the story's narration and goal. You're following the plot's narrator. It's kind of like you're under some sort of psychedelic influence, perhaps. So therefore, some of the decisions might seem a bit odd as to why we don't try to actually escape at any point in time, for example. I would argue the story is fine. It's not the strong suit of the game. That goes to the mechanics, the setting, the atmosphere, and especially the sound design. It's very confusing and not all that satisfying once you reach the end. It's a little bit disheartening, but I think the game gets carried by the other strengths to the point where the story does not necessarily detract from the whole all too much. It would have been nice to have a more concise story setup for these horror games for once, instead of another mystery box though. But that's it for the story. You should likely play it for yourself. Maybe you will understand it better than I did, perhaps, and then you can come back here and explain to me what happened. Now we talk about music and sound design. The in-game soundscape. This game has very little music, only reserved for pivotal moments or tension, but the sound design in this game is superb. Mick Gordon himself worked on parts of the sound design too, which is very noticeable. This game has very loud and aggressive industrial sounds. It really is intimidating how sudden this game can turn up the volume on you, and that is one of the aspects that leads to such an amazing atmosphere alongside the lighting and the art style. The humming of machines, the stomping around of the robots, the aggressive scanner sounds when these robots survey a room they think you might be in. Then we have the sounds of the core and the interfaces you interact with, all culminating in a very nicely tuned soundscape. The only issue I had once or twice is that some of the spatial audio in the game is almost too strong. Therefore, you think enemies are closer than they actually are, and in very, very rare cases, extremely rare, I heard enemies from the total opposite where they were actually moving from. So I heard something from the left, and then I went to the right to loop around, and I basically walked right into an enemy, which was coming around from the exact right side actually, and not from the left. That and some very funny visual glitches, which would be spoilers if I show them here, were the only actual issues I encountered in the game. But overall, the sound direction in this game is extremely well done. Now let's talk about the art direction, which you have seen plenty of already. And as you have probably already seen, this game employs a retro-futuristic art style akin to Alien Isolation, or the Alien movies in general. And I also think this is why the game gets compared to it so much. The game world is extremely highly detailed and populated with lots and lots of immersive props. One of the highlights of this game which contributes to its immersion. An immersively stocked room is always nice to see. It makes the place feel realistic and lived in. The game has a living quarters, a mall area, some more industrial and high-tech areas, and finally a very different looking moon station in a rugged, more run-down, older style with a server room, a laboratory, of course there has to be a laboratory, and a much more practical industrial look to it. Showing off too much of this is tantamount to spoilers, so I will not go too far here. Safe to say, even though we are dealing with Unreal Engine here, these developers have put it to good use. And with that being said, we can just kind of talk quickly about the graphical fidelity of the game. It's one of the least important aspects, as I think art style always trumps graphical fidelity. But if you're a graphics whore, yes, the game looks very good and realistic. Due to the engine, it was kind of predictable, but it does not suffer from the generic empty and hollow Unreal asset curse that some of these games have. It also does not use any uncanny human face models, since you are pretty much alone up there, and for the robots, and especially in a horror game, uncanny is fine, but thankfully you do not meet any weird plastic-faced NPCs in this game. Yeah, the game looks great. Although there is some crunchiness going on in the distance, I assume this is due to how the game culls and loads objects, in conjunction with the anti-aliasing this game utilizes. It has a slightly pixelated, distorted look to it if you pay close attention to items in the far background, if you focus on stuff like this, but it's never something that's in your direct vicinity. It's a very small complaint. Overall, the game looks very, very nice. But again, the art style is what carries the visual section without a doubt. Now, in conclusion, all in all, Routine is a very capable little horror sci-fi experience with a bit of a convoluted story, some really good and immersive mechanics, and some spooks and puzzles to go along with it. It's not reinventing the wheel or anything. I don't think it will blow you away with any of its aspects, but I liked it all around. I hope you can take a look at it, whether that is now or later at a discounted price. The choice is yours. But always remember, be reasonable with your money. I know not everyone can just splooge on random games nowadays. You decide for yourself if you want to play this. And if you don't want to play it, I will hopefully have a full playthrough of this one up on the channel at some point, and then you can just watch that one. And with that, I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you next time.